I'm going to start it up. We got a quorum.
Yeah.
Okay, this meeting of the Norwalk Board of Education is called to order. Our first item of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. The next order of business is our spotlight, which tonight is on the Brian McMahon High School Special Olympics Unified Champion Team. And Ms. Keys is tied up at another meeting on the Early Childhood Council, I guess. So Mr. Barbas will run this for us.
Good evening. Tonight we would like to recognize Brian McMahon High School as a Special Olympics Unified Champion School. And I'm going to read a little background about this, and then we will call names of the participants and award you a certificate from the Board of Education. The board does recognize Brian McMahon High School, which has been named a Special Olympics Unified Champion School. The designation was made by Special Olympics Connecticut and the Connecticut Interscholastic Athletic Conference. The Special Olympics Unified Champion Schools have an inclusive school climate and exude a sense of collaboration, engagement, and respect for all members of the student body and staff. To qualify for this recognition, schools must meet the following: have a unified sports team or teams that participate in at least 2 sports seasons, demonstrate inclusive youth leadership, demonstrate whole school engagement, and ensure the sustainability of these components. At Brian McMahon, the Best Buddies program has become an integral part of the school culture. The student-run Friendship Club creates buddy pairs between students with and without disabilities and helps create an inclusive school climate and culture of acceptance. The McMahon Unified Sports Team is part of the program's extracurricular activities. This is McMahon's second year of competition, with unified teams now competing in both soccer and basketball. Over 25 students participate in the program, which includes after-school practices to prepare for interscholastic friendly competitions. Families, friends, and faculty cheer for teams and celebrate with them during medal award ceremonies and with pizza parties after each competition. As part of the recognition, McMahon was awarded a banner that reads, Special Olympics Unified Champion School, that is similar to the athletic championship banners that hang in many high schools. On behalf of the entire Board of Education, we congratulate Brian McMahon's principal, Suzanne Corchetz, program advisors Amanda Bowles and Kelsey Murphy, and all the students who participated in making this program a success. So thank you. And now I'm going to call your names, and if you would come up, you can introduce yourself to the board members, and I'm going to present you with a certificate. The first recipient I would like to call is Kelsey Murphy. And the second would be Amanda Bowles.
Well done, Kelsey. Good job, Amanda.
Maria Cabrera. Christine Fitzgibbon. Cleveland Morrow Little. Giovanni Gonzalez. Noelia Baker Ortiz. Richard Olivier. Elisir Malave. Elisir Malave. Autumn Perry. Kyle Stefanko. Kyle Stefanko. Rafael Rosario. And is there anyone else I might have missed? Okay, well, thank you, and you're to be congratulated for all of your efforts and your inspiration.
All right, thank you all. All right, thank you. It's good to start a meeting off with some positive news. Next item on the agenda is public comments. And again, over to you, Mr. Barbas.
Okay, our first speaker will be Mary Jordan.
And by the way, those of you who've received your awards, you're free to go. We're going to go into our business meeting.
Enjoy your night.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Mary Jordan, 9 Mott Avenue, Suite 302. Tonight, I'm looking forward to hearing lots of interesting things, including what just occurred. One of the things on the agenda is the talent management vision status. We are, the NFT and others in the district are very well served by our talent management team, by the talent office. We have dedicated and knowledgeable people there, and we are very well served. They are responsive to the needs, to our needs. I expect that we are all aware of that recruiting certified staff in some shortage areas is very challenging. Finding staff that reflect the wonderful racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of Norwalk is an additional challenge, and we are not the only community in this position. Tonight you will likely hear about a plan to use Teach for America as a recruitment tool. I'd like to share a quick thought or two about this. First of all, the way it is configured, it seems that TFA teachers would be joining our union, so my organization is not going to lose if they come on board. We, NFT, have teachers that got to be teachers through very many various paths, and they all stand to make good colleagues. My main concern with TFA recruits is not their inexperience. We hire new teachers all the time, and although our new teachers generally have more experience than these, they sometimes make good teachers. Just as important, however, as recruitment is retention, and that's my focus. Our strategic operating plan goal includes exemplary teachers to teach our students, and teachers aren't exemplary in the first 2 to 3 years. My main concern about TFA recruits is that they don't tend to stick around, and we have to actually pay to recruit them. So although we may serve a need for diversity with TFA recruits, and we may serve a need of hiring numbers with them, we also add to the problems of high turnaround and the churn of inexperienced teachers in our district. Our students deserve better and would benefit from experienced, excellent teachers. What to do about teacher retention and teacher recruitment? The Albert Shanker Institute published a 2016 report about this, and it showed that the problem nationally had to do with more than recruitment, that teachers of color tended to be hired at higher proportions than other teachers, but they tend to leave the profession more quickly. And this report explored why. It was mostly related to a lack of collective voice in educational decisions and a lack of professional autonomy. That was what was primarily reported. Other studies about retention and recruitment have shown that stability in the district helps a good deal. Working conditions, thank you, one more paragraph, thanks. Working conditions, administrative and principal leadership needs to improve. In general, teacher preparation programs need to improve in general, and mentoring programs for new teachers. We are facing the same challenges as other districts. Other alternatives exist that we are exploring, such as recruitment for career ladders of paraprofessionals. In summary, we are facing tough economic decisions here in Norwalk. We need to spend every dime very carefully. Please consider working conditions holistically as a recruitment tool. Your work, especially Mr. Barbas, to build beautiful new schools is a recruitment tool. the work to overhaul curriculum, policies, and improve communication will all serve our district very well. Running a district that informs teachers of policy and practices rather than giving the teachers the opportunity to have a voice in the development of the policy and practices will have a more negative impact. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is John Mosby.
John Mosby, 15 Adams Avenue. I'm going to be very brief here tonight. I see on here where you got Black History Month. I think that's one of the best things we ever heard. And I want to let you all know they choose me to get the biggest award. The NAACP picked me and a few other people in our community. They honored me with the biggest award in this history of this country. For all of my standing up for all the people. And I'm very proud to accept that. I'm gonna be very brief, then I'm gonna sit down. I want to say to the board, I'm not trying to start no trouble, but I was very diseased at that meeting y'all had last night when you didn't let the public say nothing about the contract. This contract, what you all doing, gonna affect a lot of us retirees people. We got hundreds of guys. Won't be no more pensions now. You're going to the 401k. We got to stand up. See, the union don't represent us. We have to represent ourselves. And I heard that last night when they say the contracts are equal better. You know, I wrote all them contracts. And I want to straighten you out, Nancy. You put in there, say, Mr. Murphy started at 70. 1970. I started in the 60s, ma'am. I wish y'all get your facts straight before you put it in the paper. I started in the 60s. I was head of the union for 29 years. And every contract you got, I wrote them. And I know them contracts like a breath. It say equal or better, but you have to come to the membership. They have to decide if they want it. They don't like it, they can stop it. So with these you guys coming up here, union guys coming up here with you all, and y'all going in executive session, that's fine. But you're not going to mess with these guys. 90% of these custodians, including the guards, is under my grandfather clause of 203 when I left them. So we're under the pension. So I want to put you on notice. If you try to take our pension from us retired, we're going to take you back into court. So if you want to sit down with us, we're willing to do it. And let me tell you one thing, we're doing pretty good in the code now. Jersey begin to look around. And I'm going to say the final thing. I'm glad that woman in Wilton, she followed the freedom of information. Yes, y'all been violating the freedom of information. The laws say when you have an open meeting, you must have the public to have an input on everything. And I want to say to you, board, I'm so proud of that NAACP. I'm so proud of the black community. I'm so proud of the white community. I got white people say they gonna come there, Mr. Murphy, we want to be there with you. Spanish want to be there with me. We want out, you talking about diversity. Gentlemen, we got to stop this foolishness and take care of our children and bring on some diversity. Thank you very much.
And that concludes our public remarks for this evening.
Okay, moving right along, we will go to actions. First item under actions is item 5.1, approval of Black History Month recognition. There is a resolution in the packet. Is there a motion to approve? Sherelle moves. Eric seconds. Is there discussion on the motion? No? Okay. All in favor of adopting the resolution designating February 1 to February 28 as Black History Month in Norwalk, please indicate. And that is unanimously approved. Thank you. All right, item 2 is approval of Phase 1, West Rocks Middle School Windows and Door Replacement Project 103-0244EC. Let's see, Mr. Hamilton, why don't you come up and walk us through this one?
Okay, the West Rocks Windows project was a project that was funded in last year's capital budget, you may recall, and the detailed architectural work, preparing drawings and bid specifications has been ongoing, administered through the city's NFCC, the Norwalk Facilities Construction Commission. Alan Lowe, you probably are aware, is the city staff member who staffs the commission. I've provided you a memo. I'll just walk through it quickly. Basically, we're at the point now in the process where we are ready to go up to the State of Connecticut School Construction Facilities Unit and obtain their approval of the final plans and specifications. Those final plans and specifications need approval from the state before we can go out to bid. After they're approved by the state, we would expect to go out to bid in the coming months in anticipation of a construction project that needs to take place during the summer break period. So that's kind of the reason we're bringing it to you is before we can actually go to the state, they need to see proof that the Board of Education as well as the NFCC have approved the final plans and specifications. So what's on your agenda is approval of final plans and specifications and cost estimates. I know there's been some discussion of cost estimates, so I'll address that issue as well. As indicated in the memo here, this project has now been broken into 2 phases. Approximately half of the windows would be replaced in phase 1 this summer, and assuming the funding is made available to continue with phase 2, then the rest of the windows would be replaced in the summer of 2018. The architect, during the course of preparing the plans and specifications, had recommended that the project be broken down into 2 phases for timing reasons. They felt the project was of a size that it would be too much to try to do in one summer. Obviously, we don't want to jeopardize the ability to open school in September. That's a paramount consideration. So the architect had recommended that we divide the project into 2 phases. It so happens now that we have the updated cost estimates. It turns out that the project cost is substantially larger than we had originally anticipated, and I've provided you with a schedule of the phase 1 cost and the phase 2 cost as it now stands, and my memo to you outlines the reasons for that cost increase. In addition, there's a separate memo in your backup material from the architect that provides further documentation of the reasons for the cost increase. Couple points I do want to make in terms of generally budget estimates that are put together are prepared pretty early in the process, and the general direction that we've been giving to the architect going forward is to try to make sure that you've included sort of every eventuality in your cost estimates, precisely because we want to avoid the situation that we're facing here, which is essentially that the cost estimate that was originally prepared was inadequate after going through the more detailed process associated with detailed design. There's a lot of unknown information. At the point the original cost estimates are prepared, the architect and the district have no real understanding of the extent of hazardous materials that you may or may not run into. So you may run into asbestos, you may run into PCBs, you may run into lead or lead paint, you may run into environmental contaminants in soil from leaking oil tanks. There's a whole host of issues that potentially on construction projects you can run into. It so happens on the West Rocks project we are running into some asbestos issues and some PCB issues in the caulking that comes out as part of those windows. Typically with construction projects, the project scope is also rarely fully defined at the point that the project is first conceived. So with bigger projects, things like the educational program requirements may not be fully fleshed out. So if we're looking at other types of projects, STEM labs and so on, auxiliary facilities may not be fully fleshed out in terms of the need and sizing of gymnasiums, auditoriums, cafeterias, community uses, and so on. Outdoor recreational facilities may not be fully spec'd out, and off-site improvements may not be fully known until traffic studies are done that may indicate there's a need to make some improvements to turning lanes or traffic signals and so on. So there's a lot of unknowns at the point that project costs are being initially put together, and that's why it's important for the architects to try to estimate those as best we can and to take them into consideration. But the fact of the matter is, until you get into further into the process, it's just sort of a fact of life that the estimates are just that, estimates. You can also run into unforeseen conditions, and that's one of the issues on the West Rocks windows. So you may run into it's not uncommon, particularly when doing any kind of renovation project, when you start to demolish walls and so forth, you run into things that you hadn't known about, you hadn't expected, and that's a case. One of the issues faced with the West Rocks windows is the fact that the heating pipes happen to be attached to the building in a rather unusual way, and they're in essence being supported by or hanging from the same windows that are being removed in the window replacement project. Therefore, the architect has to build in a new support mechanism for those heating pipes that had not been built into the original estimate. So running into unforeseen conditions, unfortunately, with any renovation project is also a fact of life. And then you may also run into regulatory requirements, and that's one of the things that we've run into here as well, is some relatively new requirements relative to building vestibules. If you're doing a renovation project, as we're doing at West Rocks with doors and so on, we're now required to put in a vestibule, locking vestibule after Sandy Hook, and so that was also then a regulatory requirement that was not anticipated. And with any of these projects, you have building code requirements, ADA requirements, and other requirements, regulatory requirements that may come into play. And finally, I'd simply note that even at this stage, we have a very detailed cost estimate. We've given you the detailed cost estimate, but it is just that. It's an estimate. Until we actually go out to bid and receive bid prices back, there can be, we have certainly seen in other construction projects, projects come in sometimes well under budget and sometimes come in over budget, and that is maybe a factor of how much work is going on out in the community and what bidders are interested in doing this work and whether they've already got other things lined up and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of factors that ultimately go into this. So basically, at this point, what we're asking for, again, just to reiterate, is approval of the final plans and project manual and cost estimates for phase one, just phase one, since that's what we have the money for, so that we can go forward with replacing the windows at West Rocks this summer, at least for roughly half of the windows in the building.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I do have a few questions. First, what year was this estimate concocted and brought together for us?
I think it was 2015, I believe. I'll have to check when it was first developed.
It had to be prior to the capital budget submission last year.
Right.
Yeah.
So that would have been around this time, or December of 15 of the last school year, which was 2015-16.
Right.
Thank you, Dr. Adamowski. With a follow-up question to that, specifically because you touched on the regulatory requirements, were these not known when the estimate was being prepared?
Well, it wasn't built in here by the architect. I can't say whether those specific requirements had come out at that point, but it wasn't built in at that point. I'd have to do some research to see that. But the architect has indicated it was not in the original cost estimate.
Okay, that would be helpful to know as just some potential explanation is, for instance, if the regulation came into play after the cost estimation was finalized, that would explain why it wasn't included.
Yeah, I think the architect in his write-up had indicated it was actually believes that the doors themselves may not have been in the original estimate But after kind of getting further into the project, replacing not only the windows but the doors, which are the same vintage as the windows, made sense. And as part of that door replacement, it's my understanding, that's what triggers this vestibule replacement. So there is, some possibility if the board wanted to scale back the project and not proceed with door replacement, that might also then knock out the requirement to do the vestibule replacement. Although, certainly the recommendation from the School Safety Infrastructure Council is that all schools should have these man traps, if you will, for safety reasons. So, there is obviously a good reason to do that.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Just a few more quick follow-ups. With the heating pipes that you mentioned, was there any way that this could have been known before actually getting into demolition phase?
Well, it comes down to a question of how much investigative work do you want to do to prepare your cost estimates. And, this is really a question for the architect but, is there some way you could have known it? I'm sure there's some way you could have known it, but you're going to spend additional money to find that information out. Obviously, to learn that sort of information before you prepare a cost estimate.
Thank you. And just lastly, the jump in the estimate versus the actual is alarming. Have there been any other projects that you can think of in recent memory that have jumped at this type of percentage?
This is larger than I think we would normally expect to see, certainly, although frankly on Windows we had been given some indication that the PCB issue, until you do the testing, you don't really know what you're going to face, and there are reasons not to do extensive testing until you are moving at least into the stage that we are now. But there are other projects that I'm aware of around the state of Connecticut where the PCB remediation itself has actually cost more than the window replacement itself. So, that has been an issue in a number of communities. It was actually an issue that we faced down on the Rowayton School project, where there were PCBs that were that had been in the window caulking. The problem is the PCBs then leach into surrounding brickwork and so on, so that when you remove these windows, then you have to remediate the brick and so forth where the PCBs may have leached into. So, and in the case of Rowayton, my recollection was that that was a load-bearing wall, so it meant they had to build temporary structures to hold the building together while they remediated the PCBs. So it was a pretty big change order on Rowayton. I don't remember the exact amount. Maybe Mr. Barbas does.
It was, I think, the number that comes to my head was $600,000.
Yeah, it was big. I remember it was big. So so that the PCB issue is one that has been of quite a bit of concern around the state.
Okay, my final question actually is going to go to you, Mr. Chair, and Dr. Adamowski. Because of the information that Mr. Hamilton just brought to us on the doors, is there, if we vote on this tonight and it passes, is the phase one going to be including the building of the doors and the vestibules?
It would actually be a question for Tom.
Tom would know that.
So then it's actually going to bounce back to you guys after I get that response. Okay. So, sorry.
Main entry vestibule is phase 2, according to this plan.
So the main entry is phase 2. Are any doors in phase 1?
Some.
I'm not 100% sure of that.
The vestibule is pretty expensive, though, right?
Right.
Door hardware.
And I want to explain my rationale for this. Is the reason I'm asking is because if phase 2 includes the building of the vestibules, which seems to be a larger cost driver in this project, perhaps we can look at that and rationalize if it's wise to include that in this project or make it a separate one when we would have more money available, as we're already facing a very large budget season, as most of us know. So that's what I was interested in. So if we vote on phase 1 tonight and approving it, I will say that I'm in favor of making these improvements. However, with the light of the requirements and regulations around the vestibules, if it is included in phase 2, that would give us some more time to look at that and see if it's a possibility to separate out, to get back to our initial reason for this, which was replacing the windows which were in ill repair.
So Tom has indicated the vestibule is in phase 2.
Yeah. Which does permit us that
Right.
option.
So, you have a number of options here. One option is to use the money you have for phase 1. Because the cost is close to doubled. Then you have the option of going back into the capital budget in a subsequent year to request phase 2. You also have the option of just doing phase 1 if there are other priorities ahead of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Brian?
Yeah, Bill Ireland's not here. Maybe, I don't know if you can answer this. I'm trying to reconcile his letter. He says that the item to build around the heat system, the unforeseen scope added approximately $350,000. I know the thing about doors and windows. I can't reconcile that $350,000 with anything in this schedule, save for steel plate support for curtain wall, that Division 5 and phase 1, but that only comes up with a fraction of that. What are the items here that are specific to moving the heat system and shoring it up so they can put windows in that don't fall out?
I'm not sure I can answer that off the top of my head. I think, I mean, I can look through it and see if I can pick it out. Well, you have $135,000 for demoing the Windows system. I don't know whether whether some of that is in there. In terms of shoring it up,
Yeah, I wasn't trying for a trick question.
yeah, I see
Figure it out.
67,000 for Unitrust support assembly for second floor radiators and steel radiator enclosure for second floor radiators, another 30,000. So I think both of those would be related to that item. I mean, I can ask the architect for a breakout on that, but I think that would be, probably something the architect would need to answer.
Okay, fair enough, thanks.
Eric?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Out of curiosity, and I'm not sure who would answer this, Mr. Hamilton, Dr. Adamowski, if we were to not move on this tonight and perhaps table it until some of these other questions could be answered, a little bit of clarification, would this delay the project being implemented this year? If we were to, say, vote on it at our next business meeting, giving us roughly 2 weeks to get some of these answers given to us?
Yeah, I think there's a very good chance it would be. We have a meeting scheduled with the state on February 14th that we would need to call off and reschedule, and obviously we have to reschedule based on their availability. So, I can't tell you definitively that we would be unable to do it this summer, but I think that there's a very real possibility that that could be what happens.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Art?
Yeah, I don't think Tom can answer this question, but I seem to remember that the window issue at West Rocks came up during our security audit about 3 years ago.
I think that's right.
And I thought it was being funded by that, the money that we put aside for that.
No, there was a separate appropriation in the capital budget last year.
I think you're right that it was highlighted as an issue, but I
yeah.
don't think the funding for that went to those.
Okay.
Because you're right, we had about $2.5 million.
Yeah, we had
in there.
$2.5 million.
But that went for, locks on the doors, security, camera systems, and,
Right.
A bunch of other stuff, but I don't think
Blinds,
we
we did
Blinds,
Yep.
film on the
Blinds,
window, or
Glass.
film on glass.
The film on the glass for
Can't
bullet
say that.
resistance.
Oh.
It's been in the paper. But yeah, this
Okay.
itself. So this
For some reason
originated from that.
Yeah,
but
that's where it originated.
but it
For
has
some
a life
reason, I
of its
thought
own.
we were funding it at that point, but I guess not.
No. Yes, Heidi?
Thanks, Tom, for the very thorough report. I was actually part of the liaison. We had a couple of meetings at West Rocks for the windows, and I was in shock when we originally spoke about how much it would be, and then the following meeting, it doubled. And it was unforeseen conditions as far as PCBs, asbestos, and such. But, you know, I think it is very costly, especially, Eric, you had mentioned during this really crucial budget season. It's tough, but we did discuss doing it in phases from the very beginning. You know, phase one over the summer, this coming summer, 2017, and then the following summer, 2018. And I know that you have a meeting coming up in February, like you just mentioned. So I think Eric has a great point if we can hold off, but it looks as if this needs to get done.
Yeah, our February 14th meeting would definitely need to be rescheduled, because they have indicated that they don't want to see us if we don't come forward with this form that has the chairman's signature on it, indicating that the plans have been approved by the board. If the board wants to table the plans, then we're going to have to cancel the February 14th. Now, you know, if you were to approve it 2 weeks later, obviously, you know, it's going to depend on how quickly we can get up to the state and you know, the timeline involved. But, you know, there is a fairly involved process on all these things. The bid specs have to be out for a certain period of time. Then the bid specs come back. They have to be evaluated. And then these bid specs go through a city process for approval through the NFCC, and then on to the Land Use Committee of the Common Council, and then on to the full Common Council. And that depends on their meeting schedule and you know, when those meetings occur. And obviously you want to then award the contract before the end of school, so that essentially the contractor can be mobilized and ready to start work, you know, the day that school lets out, essentially.
And we were also looking at the safety of children, obviously not having it during the school year, but having it during the summer when school isn't in session. But I know that there was a sense of urgency to get this done. And I asked Alan, in all his years, his experience, did he ever come across such a huge jump, really double what we discussed originally? He said, sometimes this does happen, not necessarily jumping in price like this and cost, but it is, you have unforeseen conditions that just pop up and we don't realize until later on.
Else? All right, well, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the phase one replacement project. Is there a motion? So moved. Is there a second? Second. Any other discussion?
Excuse me.
All right, we'll proceed to a vote. All in favor of approving the phase one plans, please indicate. 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 2. All right, it's 5 in favor, 2 opposed. Motion is approved. All right, Tom, go get them. All right, we're now going to commence our work session for tonight. And we're going to start with our 504 Policy and Procedures Manual. Dr. Adamowski, take it away.
Thank you. So two important workshop topics tonight that we hope that the presentations will provide the board a firm understanding on issues that have not been well understood. That is particularly true of the first issue. The board will recall that when the CREC audit was done in the fall of 2015, one of the recommendations dealt with our handling of 504 plans. And you may recall that the CREC auditors identified this as a general education issue, right? Essentially a provision of the Civil Rights Act that enables access to an educational program. It's not quite that simple, because we do have students who are special education students who also have 504 plans and IEPs. So it really was necessary, and we set as a goal for this year to redesign our systems for handling 504. And this requires involvement in special education as well as in technology. Many of the 504 adaptations are technology-based. They're adaptive technology that allows a student to learn or participate in a way they could not before. So we have with us tonight, Ralph Alanzisi has been working hard on this really across the district in several departments. He's with us tonight, as well as Ms. Marshal Moses, who is our Special Education Counsel, who is also an expert in this area and has been helpful in providing guidance and training our staff. So we're going to spend about 30 minutes on this in terms of information, and then the rest is up to you in terms of a discussion and questions.
Great, and good evening, board members, and thank you, Dr. Adamowski, and thanks, Marcia, for coming out tonight. So really, what we wanted to start with is I'm going to kind of turn this over to Marcia for the first 10 minutes to really just talk a little bit about the definition of what Section 504 is, so we can kind of have a broad overview. What I'd like to do at that point then is talk a little bit more about what the plan has been like, what we kind of, as Dr. Adamowski mentioned, close to about a year ago, he had talked to me about moving forward and actually reevaluating the way that we handle Section 504. So we started developing a plan, and I want to talk to you a little bit about what we did over the summer, things that we've put into place so far this year, and then how we're going to be moving forward in the future, and then answer any questions for you with that. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Marcia for a second to talk a little bit about Section 504.
The board has these slides in front of you, and I believe there's copies for the public as well.
Great. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having the opportunity to talk about this subject tonight. As Dr. Adamowski indicated, it is complicated. I've had the opportunity to work starting, I guess, in August with staff here and with Ralph, and we've been doing some training. So I guess my initial caveat is that the training we've been doing with staff on this is about a 2.5 hour training, and I'm going to try to cover this topic for you briefly in about 10 minutes or so. So we're going to give you a really broad overview of this staff. Of course, I welcome your questions. So as you can see, Section 504 is, we refer to it as Section 504. It's a part of the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And it's part of the body of laws that were enacted in the late 60s, the early 70s, and it's basically a non-discrimination statute. It protects individuals with disabilities from discrimination, and it's a very simple statute. The language is pretty straightforward. I've quoted it here for you, and it basically provides that no qualified handicapped person shall, on the basis of handicap, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or otherwise be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity which receives federal financial assistance. And of course, public schools like Norwalk receive federal financial assistance, so this law applies to the public schools and to the Norwalk Public Schools. So this is obviously a statute that we take seriously, and we've got to make sure that we comply with it. The statute, it actually parallels in many ways the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we look at it in terms of who are those students who qualify for eligibility. So we make sure that our staff is aware that a student under 504 will be eligible if a student has what's called a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a major life activity. So these are each, and we're not going to go through all of these definitions tonight, but we make sure our staff knows these definitions. These are all very specifically defined. There is a lot of need for people who sit at the 504 table to understand these terms, and there's a lot of explication of them. So one of the things you will note, and that we're going to talk a little bit about, and that I think Ralph will get into in a little bit more, is these are very specific criteria and standards. And they're different criteria and standards than eligibility for students with special education. And to Dr. Adamowski's point, that's why there's a separation between Section 504 and the IDEA. So for students who are eligible for 504 and for students who are eligible for special education. So one of the things we have to keep thinking about is that this is a statute that protects against discrimination based on disability. All students who qualify under Section 504 are protected from discrimination based on their disability. So those students who I just described, those students who have a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits a major life activity, will get a 504 plan and also are protected against discrimination. And also students who are regarded as having an impairment, even if they actually don't, or have a history. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about those tonight, but we just want you to understand that those students also could be discriminated against. And actually, Mr. Valenzusi is the 504 coordinator in the building. Part of the responsibilities that he will have and does have is that if there are any kinds of complaints about disability discrimination, he has the responsibility of investigating those complaints, making sure that they're reviewed. And one of the things we'll talk about very briefly is the fact that in our policy manual we now have grievance procedures. Parents are will be aware of those as a result of this new manual, that there will be appropriate notices, and this is a very significant responsibility. This is just a very brief kind of graphic to help understand. So we have the general population of all students, regular education or general education, those students who don't require any kind of specialized instruction. And then within that, we have those students who are only 504 students, those students who I've just described. And then within that, we have a smaller circle of students who are those special ed students. Once those students are identified as special education, they also actually meet the criteria of 504, but they meet very specialized criteria. This also kind of confirms why we treat the 504 students differently than we're going to treat those students with special education needs. The definition under 504, once we meet those criteria, provides that those students are also entitled to what's called a free appropriate education. But under 504, we have somewhat of a different definition of free appropriate public education. And what we're told for those students with 504s is that those students are entitled to a free appropriate public education that's designed to meet their needs. And this is where you hear that sort of non-discrimination concept, as adequately as the needs of non-disabled students are met. So it's that kind of equal opportunity concept. Again, we're not going to discriminate in opportunities for students who meet 504 eligibility. So what is the district's responsibilities under 504? And this is where our manual has come into play. We've worked very hard on this. We've had focus groups, as you'll hear about, and have come up with a manual that I think you'll be proud of. The district has what are called child find responsibilities, which means there's an obligation to make sure that those students out there who do qualify for 504 are, quote, found. So that we need to make sure we know who those students are, that there is a referral process in place, and that they are brought into the 504 process. That includes that those students go through evaluations, and those evaluations can look different from, but not necessarily, the special education process. We have, as you've just heard, a 504 coordinator for the district, but also 504 coordinators within each building. And all of their responsibilities are very clear and concise and delineated. So it's become very organized with notices and clarifications as to what their obligations are. We have 504 teams, again, different from PPT teams, but we're clear now who are those 504 teams? How are we going to compose them? And then I've talked very briefly about what eligibility criteria looks like. That's part of what the obligations are. And then services and accommodations. Once a student is found eligible, how does the team go about making sure that that 504 student receives appropriate services, appropriate accommodations, appropriate 504 plan? A student with who is 504 is entitled to equal access to extracurricular activities. We've addressed that. And then, as I said, we have procedural safeguards that also are included. So that's a very, very brief overview of a statute which has many, many aspects to it. I just wanted to add one thing quickly. This statute is overseen in many respects by the Office of Civil Rights. That is an arm of the United States Department of Education. We are within the Boston region, and the Office of Civil Rights provides much guidance. They've issued a number of what are called Dear Colleague letters and guidance. And much of that has been incorporated into the policy manual that we have now developed. So I think that kind of summarizes the overview at this point in time. Thank you.
And thank you, Marcia, for kind of putting in context what we've been working with. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit, once again, Dr. Adamowski kind of prefaced this earlier about the fact of the differentiation between special education and general education. And as you've, as we've noted in our strategic operating plan, one of our goals is to implement the CREC report. And the CREC report specifically states and actually makes that delineation between the two. So this is just the first step in that process of moving in that direction. Once again, Marcia talked a little bit about the fact that 504 is really, it's around non-discrimination and equitable access for students. A lot of it has to do with technology, a lot of it has to do with other areas too, as I learned very, very quickly as we move forward with this. And so, I mean, I know I'll be thanking them a little bit later, but the special ed department here in our district and stuff, Stacy, Joe, Angela Rinaldi, who you meet in a minute, and Maureen Sullivan have all been real critical in helping me through this process, and it's been a learning experience for me as well. But once again, there's definitely that delineation between the two. So what I want to talk about a little bit is just to start and give you a brief history of where we were at about a year ago and the steps that Marcia kind of indicated, and through her consultation we've been able to implement, but also the things that we're doing as we move forward with this. Looking at just an overview of the district this time last year, there were a couple of needs that I kind of noticed immediately as I started talking to principals, started talking to teachers, looking at our process. One of the larger issues was definitely a need for consistency throughout the district in our implementation of Section 504. And I can give you a couple of examples of this, some very brief examples. One example would be that, in some situations that we'd have a certain form that would be used as a referral process in one building, and maybe the form looked a little bit different over the period of years in another building. So we wanted to make sure that we developed this consistency. I know that Marcia talked a lot, or talked for a moment about OCR, and how this really falls under that umbrella. As we move forward, one of the things that I've learned is that as we look at how we're servicing our students through Section 504, there are going to be times where we're going to make mistakes. If we don't have a consistent process, and if we ever have an audit, the consistency and actually is going to be more of a compliance issue for us than actually making a mistake. Because as long as we know there's a process to be followed so that we can correct our mistakes, we know that we'll actually be in a good place. And so that was one of the first key indicators, is that we needed to develop that kind of consistency, and I can't stress that enough. So that's one of the things that we've been working on quite a bit this year. We also realized that there was a need for professional development across the district. We had a number of key people that really understood Section 504, but there were numbers of people in the district that came from different districts and had different ways of approaching this depending on where they were. Or even within the district over a period of time, there's never been a consistent process of professional development for all the stakeholders. So we tried to make sure that this year, and you'll see in the plan, that we've actually made sure that we're starting to address from every area how we're going to be able to address this and continue that process over the next couple of years. In order to develop that consistency too, one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that we had in place is everything around the district was paper-based. And we needed to kind of automate this so that we can kind of keep that consistent manner. So we have, if you're familiar with IEP Direct, which is our online system for tracking IEPs, there's another module in there called 504 Direct that's now been implemented. And throughout this year, we've been training people and getting them on board. So by this time, at the beginning of the next school year, all of our students that do have 504s will be in 504 Direct. And that's been one of our goals this year. One of the other needs that really came up, and I know that Ms. Mosby, who actually sat in our focus group, had heard this a number of times, and it was a big point of conversation, as well as what I'm hearing from teachers, principals, and the community in general, is the need for vertical articulation and communication. So if a student is transitioning from elementary to middle school or middle school to high school, how do we develop a consistent process that we know that those students, first of all, the new teachers coming in, there's an onboarding process. Teachers know that they have 504s, that there's been some kind of transition meeting or bridging meeting. I think we're labeling it in our manual as a transition meeting, but in the past you may have heard of that term as bridging. So we're making sure that that actually happens consistently once again for all of our students. So from these needs, we decided to develop a plan moving forward. And our first steps this year were to get a baseline of where we stand. So currently, right now, we have about 338 students that are identified with 504s. And I think we've just gotten a recent number on the number of IEPs, just in case anybody wants to know, is about 1,671. That also includes, correct me if I'm wrong, our outplaced students as well. So great, thank you. One of the elements that I didn't put in there, because I really want to look into this a little bit further, is students that actually have both an IEP and a 504. So in many cases, students with an IEP, their accommodations are covered within that, so they don't necessarily need a 504, but there are some situations, in a typical situation I use as an example, is a student could have a learning disability and a peanut allergy. So they could actually have a 504 for the peanut allergy, but then an IEP to deal with those accommodations. So right now, I just want to, as we go kind of peel the onion back, I think we really need to look at whether or not there should be some more dissemination between them. Currently, I believe we have notated about 12 or 14 of students that actually have that dissemination between both, but I'm not 100% sure on that number, but we'll know as time goes on and we'll as we continue to clean up this process. One of the other things we did is we developed a professional development plan. So as Marcia indicated, we wanted to start with some of the key stakeholders who are directly involved with the 504 process. We started in August by spending a full day of working with guidance counselors, social workers, who are really kind of the key point people in the buildings that usually kind of been handling the nuts and bolts of the process, as well as nurses who really needed to understand a little bit more about the 504 process. We discussed everything from how do you develop and have your 504 teams, who should be included, what are accommodations? How do you go through the whole referral process and so forth? So we started that in August. We continued that process in November with the guidance counselors and social workers. We're going to continue that annually with those stakeholders and find a way to kind of make sure that they get refresher courses on a regular basis, and that new people that are onboarded in those areas also get support to understand what our processes are. One of the other key stakeholders in this is our principals. So we've introduced Section 504 and some of the changes to the legislation in October at their principals meeting. At their next principals meeting, we'll be also introducing the new manual that you're looking at, the draft manual, for them to kind of give us some feedback before we bring it up for adoption later on in the spring. We will continue with the process of training principals. We're also going to start to develop resources for principals to be able to work with their own staff, because taking all the teachers to train them in Section 504 it would be a difficult task, especially with a lot of other initiatives that we have, but we can embed that into how principals help to do their professional development, and as long as we give them the correct resources, as well as looking at how do we develop resources for them to talk to their parents and to the community about understanding more about Section 504. So we do plan on doing that over a period of time. One of the other things that we did, one of the first steps, as I mentioned earlier, is actually put into place an online system, which is 504 Direct. So that is now currently in place and working. We've been implementing it. We've been doing a lot of training. Donna Patchen has been working with me in my department on making sure that we've actually implemented the system. She's doing a lot of training with clerical staff and others that have to enter data. She also manages the IEP Direct, so she's had a good familiarity with it, so we make sure that we kind of keep the processes consistent once again between the two. And we've also worked on updating the procedures manual, which you have in front of you, with having initially some initial changes from the training that went on. We developed a new manual that was more parent-friendly. When you get a chance to read it, you'll see that we really tried to take a look at it from the lens of a parent, so that they can really understand what Section 504 is, what their rights are, what they should be looking for, who they can contact. It's a very streamlined process, and we're going to continue to kind of work on that process too, and I'll explain that in just a moment. We also, one of the items that I did not put on this slide right here, that we also implemented, and this is in conjunction with special ed, is we have a new position, and I'd like to introduce to everybody. I don't know, Angela, if you can just stand up and say hello. So, Angela Rinaldi is our new assistive technology specialist, and this was implemented through the appropriation that we had for special education and moving things forward. This was one of the steps in actually making those changes.
The Special Ed Development Fund, this is one of the items.
Okay. Angela's role has been to really help make sure that we have once again, a consistent process of evaluation, as well as making sure that we make modifications for students with the use of technology. She's a wealth of knowledge and has had experience in the health industry, as well as a certified special ed teacher. I mean, she's been, like I said, a wealth of knowledge to myself and my own technology department, has helped out a lot with special ed, but is also helping in the process of implementing Section 504. So between that, it's like we finally do have a consistent resource that's actually building a process here in Norwalk. We can make sure that we can deliver the goods that we need to for all of our students and make sure that they have the correct accommodations. So definitely thank you, Angela, for all of that. So we've developed a focus group. Let's see. Our next steps in moving forward. We're going to complete the manual. So we've given it to you to review. We've actually had a focus group, as I mentioned, and I'll be thanking the members of the focus group at the end of the presentation, so you can see who was on there. We made sure with the focus group that we also covered all stakeholders in the district. So on the focus group, we had teachers, we had administrators, we had different members of the 504 implementation team. So representatives from guidance, from social workers. We've had a nurse on the system as well, and more importantly, we had parents that actually have 50, students with 504s, so they could actually view from the elementary as well as the secondary level. And like I said, Ms. Mosby actually helped us quite a bit in that process as well too. So thank you for taking those couple of afternoons to spend some time with us. Our next step though is I've talked to Dr. Krebsfor. We're on February 14th. We will be presenting this manual for feedback from the Special Ed Committee to see if they have any other additional input. Once we get that input, I'll be able to kind of craft the manual for you for adoption, which I'm figuring will probably come to you sometime in April. One of the things you don't see in the packet right now is you see an appendix for forms. The reason we didn't include the forms is because we talked about a consistency. As we are updating the procedures manual and making changes to vocabulary there, we're going to make sure that the vocabulary in the forms that we currently have that are now consistent, that they still match correctly with what we're saying in the procedures manual. So that'll be the work that I'll be doing throughout the month of March and April before it comes up for final adoption. But they are just standardized forms that will be used throughout the district and every one of our schools. So that is one of the things that we're going to try and complete by the end of this school year, is to make sure that we have a procedures manual in place. We're going to continue to work on annual and ongoing training for Section 504 for all of the stakeholders that we mentioned. And I mentioned a couple of different ways we'll be doing that. Administration will get it on a regular basis. The 504 team members will all have the opportunities throughout the year to be able to attend different types of trainings and updates that they would need. Teachers would be done ideally through their local schools and making sure that the principals have the resources to be able to do that type of training and updates for them. And then we also want to make sure that we develop a resource packet for parents that principals can share to be able to make it a little bit easier for them. We want to make sure that there's, along with the parental outreach, we want to make sure the community in general, most importantly our parents, understand excuse me, what Section 504 is. In order to do that, one of the ways that we're going to help do this is actually develop a new website that will be up over the summer. And it'll include all the resources you see here with, ideally, hot links, in a sense, to go to different areas. So as Marcia mentioned, when you do see the word OCR, we can make that a hot link to actually go over to any legislation that's available from OCR, so that we can keep it updated, we can make sure that we have those resources available for parents. And we also, I'm not exactly sure, to be honest, how this is going to look yet, but the idea of actually developing some parent outreach workshops throughout the year, so that if parents do have questions, that we'd have more of a central location for them to come to and ask questions about Section 504, and we can get answers for them. So, with that, before I forget, I wanted to thank all the different members of the focus group, including Angela Rinaldi, who is not necessarily on the focus group, but has been really helping a lot with the implementation. So, and I'd also like to thank, besides Joe and Stacy as our co-directors currently for special ed, if you haven't met Maureen Sullivan, one of the new members of our special ed teams coordinator, she comes with a wealth of knowledge about Section 504 too as well. So she's been integral in this process, and I couldn't thank her enough, which is why I asked her to just stop in and make sure that she kind of got acknowledged as well tonight in this process. One of our guidance counselors who wasn't able to be here tonight, but Chelsea Dosimo, if anybody knows Chelsea over at Norwalk High, she's been critical in this process, and she's truly a wealth of knowledge, has done a lot of research around 504 and the actual operations of implementing it in the school. So she's been of great help. Christine Brown, Maureen, as I mentioned, Steve O'Connell, one of our teachers, Missy Atropoulos, who's a nurse at Nathan Hale and also a parent of twins that are actually Section 504 students within the district. Ms. Mosby, Danielle, who's another one of our teachers, Christina, who's one of our curriculum instructional site directors over at Fox Run, has been really helpful. Bedard Thomas, our principal at Columbus, was also critical in this process. Donna, especially on the operations piece and making sure that we're implementing all of these areas. Marcia, and then Angela too. So between all of them, I couldn't have a better team to kind of implement this process. And, with that, I'll kind of leave it with any questions anybody may have about.
Any questions, Brian?
Hi, Ralph. Thanks for putting this framework forward. I guess my question is just more like operationally, how are we doing? Do we get an assessment? Like, is our testing software compliant? Do we have all the right ramps and stuff in place for kids to be able to get in and out of buildings?
Well, I think that would actually fall more under Bill Hodel, under ADA. This really is more on the accommodations for students, more specific students. So if there were accommodations that were not included, we would have to make sure that we address those within a section.
And
504
testing software might be Dr. Connor?
Yeah, definitely. But we have been making accommodations along the way. And once again, part of the process is, to be honest, is we've been moving forward with looking at evaluations for assistive technology. Sometimes we've had certain types of technology that, the evaluation process of actually looking at how do you evaluate what's the best tool for somebody, and also what tools are best available, which are more appropriate for an age, for a certain age level and so forth. Each one of them has to be almost done on an individual basis. Angela is the person that's actually, having her on board now, has been able to help us kind of streamline that process so we have that consistency there for that. So if there's a need for an assistive technology piece, and we know that Read-Write Gold, which is a piece of software that we do use constantly with many of our special ed as well as 504 students, if that doesn't work, Angela would actually be doing the research to say, all right, let's find a better accommodation for this student.
So does OCR like come in and tell us where we are or where we aren't? Like, I mean, our main website is not 504 compliant.
No, they respond to complaints.
Yeah, exactly. There's no audit. There's no initial baseline audit. It would just, if they came in for an audit, it would be because of a complaint that I was receiving.
Now, this is another way of measuring success, because you may recall in the fall of 15, we had all kinds of 504 complaints, and many of them dealt with the lack of articulation between grades. A student would have a 504 plan. They would be in ninth grade. The parent goes to the 10th grade parent-teacher conference and asks how the plan is going, and the teacher doesn't know what they're talking about. Now, we have not had any complaints this year. And so I think that's an indication that maybe it's not perfect, but it's going much better than it did before. It's much more consistent, much better communications. And again, we to use your term, we now have a framework and a structure around this, which allows us to have a service delivery model.
Yeah, and I think even just one of the simple pieces of having a person to communicate to. So now you know at the district level that I'm the person that you can point to if there's an issue that arises. One of the things we made sure that was consistent in the manual that we'll be talking to the principals about is that they are now the point persons in their building. They are the coordinator in the building. That they can designate a guidance counselor and so forth, but they need to be aware of exactly what's going on so that there's a consistent process that's followed in each building, and that we kind of follow that. It really comes down to that. It's like as soon as we develop that baseline and that consistency, we can start to see where we have like holes that we need to fill.
Okay. Other questions? Artie?
Under the eligibility, can it be a temporary impairment, or is it a permanent impairment?
No, it can be a temporary.
Temporary, and how temporary is that? Is there like a 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 months? Is there a time frame?
Yeah, actually, temporary is less than 6 months. So we usually say that if it's less than 6 months, or if we think it's not going to be more than 6 months, it probably isn't going to be. So, if a student has like a broken leg, that's and it's probably going to be not going to last more than, a few weeks, something like that, that's probably not going to be a child who's going. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to give that student, an elevator key or accommodations or something like that. We want to help that child have access, but that child may not necessarily qualify under this statute. But I think, and actually we address that in the manual, and specifically say, we still want to make sure that child is going to be able to get around the building.
Yeah, and one of the things we've talked to with the nurses about too, there's sometimes where there's like a health plan that needs to be put in place that's not necessarily a 504. So that was part of the training, is like how to kind of disseminate between those.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. Mike?
There's some things that you said tonight that didn't match what I thought I knew. So could you maybe just explain the status, and maybe it's what you were referring to as IDEA, but when people go from a student goes from a 504 to an IEP, could you just tie in, don't you have to have a 504 before you can have an IEP?
That's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it. Actually, no. The answer is no. So we have a regulation in Connecticut under our special ed regulations that are very clear about when there is a referral for special education. And we don't need to have certain things happen before there is a referral for special education. So we talk about whether a student has a certain number of discipline referrals, or whether there's absenteeism, including truancy, and whether there's unacceptable academic performance in Connecticut. Those can be the basis for an automatic referral to special education. And we have in our manual the fact that there may be reasons that the 504 team is going to look at a student and say, you know what, this is a student who we want to refer to a PPT. So a 504 is not necessarily a precondition to to the PPT or to an IEP. And actually, that's one thing that we're making sure that the school teams know.
And the PPT determines as to whether an IEP is warranted.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. The PPT is in charge of determining, do we suspect a disability? If yes, are we going to conduct evaluations? And if yes, do those evaluations support a student with a disability under the IDEA? That's the PPT's job. Yes. Does that clarify your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Heidi?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this. This is very thorough. I mean, it's a great beginning, I think. So we're looking at a completed copy, hopefully, in a more of an involved focus group, but looking at spring 2017.
Yes,
to have
yeah.
this complete. Okay. I think this is a great guide, a great resource for teachers, staff, parents. It's important to have this. We've never really had this before. Question, though, I think what we've lacked before, and hopefully moving forward we can fix and have it more of a fluid, make it more fluid, the transition really from like 5th to 6th, like from the elementary level to the middle school, and then once that student reaches 8th grade, you know, from 8th to 9th into high school. So I think because the team approach, which is what we want, isn't aware that that student might have a 504. So I think just making sure that we look at that closely, which I think you're starting to do that, but I think that part of the puzzle is critical.
Well, and we've started automating systems and developing forms and stuff, so to make sure that that process.
And I think that's a frustration level for parents. You know, we have to
And
go through the whole process.
I think that, you know, you have to fix responsibility there as well.
Right.
So we are very fortunate to
Yeah.
have the level of guidance counselors that we have at our middle schools, right?
Absolutely.
We have a counselor for each grade. That's highly unusual.
We do.
So we look across the state, across the nation. We have a lot of guidance counselors, you know, not 12 at the middle school level. This is a responsibility of the counselor, right?
Right.
And to ensure they know whether or not the student has a 504 plan, and then to convey that to the teachers who will be teaching that student in grade 6.
Correct, and also the parents. So it is that team approach where you have the principal involved, the teachers involved, the parents involved, and obviously the student. But you're right, in the middle school we have great guidance counselors that are a really integral key part of this. But I just want to make sure that we continue that we have that team approach, that we don't have a parent saying, well, how come you don't have my information for my student or my child going into high school or going into middle school?
it's inexcusable.
Because it's so important.
And I can honestly say from
We
experience.
addressed that.
Yeah.
We did address that, and that's where he said it was consistency with going up to the next level, with getting parents involved, and because we brought up a situation where parents going into the 9th grade, like you said, you know, if they during that transition time need to know something about their kids, who can help them. So we talked about that, and we put that in there to make sure that that's covered from the parents' perspective, from the guidance counselor, from all over. So
I appreciate Shirley being a board member and being part of this, like a liaison for this, because I think parents can get the frustration level because I think it's already taken care of. where it hasn't been
As a
taken care of, and they
parent,
just
yes, I know.
assume.
I'll just say it from my experience.
Yeah. Right.
I got a letter when my son was in 8th grade towards the end of the year saying, please come to the middle school to prepare, have a meeting to prepare him for going to high school. I went to the school and they're like, oh, sorry, no, you don't have a meeting now. You'll have one when you get to high school. No one ever said who wrote the letter, why it was sent in error, nothing. And we never had any follow-up on his 504 in high school, ever.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
And I can honestly say too, is the experience being, I live in a different district, but I am a 504 parent as well.
Right.
So I've gone through these transition processes over the years and, seen exactly, had actually a very, very good experience in the way that the guidance counselors.
And I think as parents, all of us, grandparents, parents, whatever, we've all been touched by this. So I think for us, we all have a vested interest to make sure something like this, which is so long overdue, and I'm so glad that we're working on it, to make sure that it's right. Is there any way in this, and part of the focus group, just a suggestion that we can have that we're going to make sure it's a team approach, which you have that, but making sure that you have those, from elementary to middle to high school, that we have that team approach, that it's in writing in here?
It is. So, it's funny because we actually addressed this. This was probably one of the bigger conversation topics that we had.
Yeah.
And we tried to, I think there's going to have to be a process. What we want to make sure is that the manual is friendly for parents to understand what their rights are, but not necessarily get into weeds. Now, the forms and stuff on how we address this is going to be consistent throughout the district, and that's kind of our own processes. One example of a situation that had come up, we talked about, there are times when you're going to want to have that transition meeting before you actually get to 9th grade. If that transition is from middle school to high school, there are times where that you have to have it as within that first week. It all depends on the situation. One example of one that would have to happen before is if a student has asthma and needs air conditioning. You need to make sure that student's actually going into an area that's air conditioned. Whereas in other cases, there may be other issues that you run into where you have to actually really address it immediately, but you need to address it when.
But I'm also talking about that too, Ralph, and I'll stop. I just want to add one more thing, but the accommodations also for students that just might need more of that extra pull-out service, or that where they might need extra time, let's say in a test.
Yes.
For example. So I think it's keeping the dialogue and the discussion going, and I realize that you have certain time frames during meetings that you'll have that, but I think communicating that to parents is what we need to make sure that we do, and within the school.
That's why we're going to have these workshops, focus meetings with the parents community, so we can tell them what their rights are or what they need to do to make sure that they're aligned with what's going on, so that they will know themselves that, okay, I need to go contact either the principal or the guidance counselor, whoever my point person is, when I go through the transition. And we talked about having these type of workshops, out there for the parents, because I'm the number one person about having parent involvement, because I like, to be involved. We talked about that, and then we talked about making sure the transition going in there, getting well, that was one thing, make sure the principal, although they may designate someone, but make sure that they know what's going on, because, I felt very strongly that if it's their school, they need to know what's going on. I'm not saying that they have to have hands-on with everything, but at least have some knowledge that when someone go to the principal and ask the principal a question, then the principal could at least say, oh, yes, it's being handled by so-and-so, and I can put you with that person. That way, a parent won't feel frustrated when they go to the school and talk to the principal. The principal is like, I really don't, and so we talked about all that stuff and implemented in here to make sure that it takes place. But yes, if we will go back and keep monitoring it to make sure, like you said, that it is actually being implemented and going forward to make sure that everyone's is getting what they need out of this.
And part of the 504 Direct piece also has a number of different, in a sense, online forums in order to make sure that we're following this consistency, that there's an onboarding process, an offboarding process, a referral process, and all the things are followed in truly a consistent manner. Even the letters that actually go to parents, so that a parent like Mr. Barbas was just mentioning isn't left out of the loop. That should never be able to happen moving forward with consistent. With this process, so that everybody there's always that communication and feedback that's going to continually happen on a regular basis.
And we're going to hold people accountable too, so that's accountability is part of there as well.
Okay. Yeah. This is great. I'm looking forward to seeing the final version, or final version, so to
Yes.
speak, in spring 2017.
Yeah, definitely. So
I
we
think-
expect to get some information from Dr. Clevercore, hopefully some feedback from the special ed ad hoc group, and then, like I said, we'll do the final cleanups, add the forms to it, and we'll bring it up to you for
And
adoption.
each school, I assume, like teams will have like multiple copies of these
Oh,
once
yeah,
it's
it'll be-
completed?
It'll be online, and like I said, I'm sharing it with the principals
Right.
in this upcoming meeting, so that they can get a.
Counselors will have it. We'll have it widely disseminated. Counselors will have it. So this is like no different than the special ed policy and procedures manual. It goes along with it, so every.
But it's just that we've never had something like this.
But we
in
have
Brattleboro.
never had it
It's
before.
very
You're
different,
right.
so it's
Yep.
important that we have this. This is great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
All right. Any other comments or
Thank
questions?
you, Ralph. Thank you, Marcia.
All right, thanks. Good work, folks.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, our second topic deals with the development of the talent office. By the way, I'm going to encourage our special ed leaders to leave so that you can be fresh in the morning with all that you have to do. But thank you for attending tonight. As you know, in the reorganization that took place, actually under Dr. Rivera before he left with the board, one of the changes or areas of development was moving from a traditional HR approach to a talent office. And, you know, we wanted to take the opportunity tonight to have Sharice clarify with you, what does that mean? What is a talent office? What does a talent office do? There happen to be 7 dimensions of talent development. But, you know, I would just say that you know, in our old traditional model, the primary focus of the Human Resources Department was to employ people, right? Employ people. Whereas the focus of a talent development model is to increase teacher and leader quality, right? And so you you hire better people, you develop them, you retain them, you end up with a higher level of teacher and leader quality that has a direct impact on Tier 1 instruction in the school district. So Sharice has had a great background in this. She has done a lot of work on it. I think she's at a point now of being able to kind of lay out where we are, where we should be going, and make some recommendations to you as well.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Adamowski. Thank you, board. First, I wanted to say that it's been a pleasure working here thus far. I know there are a lot of challenges. The work is sometimes very busy. Sometimes I leave with a headache, but it has been very rewarding. And I thank the board again for the opportunity to serve. I also wanted to just thank Mary Jordan for her comments about the office today. I know that, you know, maybe in the past the track record of HR wasn't that great, but the team has been all hands on deck, and everyone has been excited about the work that I'll share with you, and everyone has been focused on customer service, so we hope that the district is starting to feel the shift. So the purpose of tonight's presentation is to update the board on the progress of the talent management department, and mostly to talk about our vision, our goals, and our achievements thus far. Also to share the framework that the district will use to implement the talent function model, and I'll talk about the dimensions of the talent office so you'll understand what I call them bubbles, what each bubble represents, and then also to provide recommendations to move forward. You actually have in front of you the PowerPoint, and then you have something called a progress report, and I would like to go through the progress report with you in detail further into the presentation. But just to start off, we are aligning the work in the talent office to the strategic operating plan. I'm also aligning the work in the talent office to my goals that I actually set with the superintendent this year. So everything that you see us working on are actually aligned to the district, also aligned to myself, but the department as a whole is aligned to the end result for the school district. So on the strategic operating plan, our goal is goal number 4, which is a very important goal, I believe, because it is to develop exemplary teachers and school leaders and to fill the majority of our school and district leadership positions through planning and development of staff from within. Many companies go outside to hire their staff. We want to look at our staff internally. My view since I've been here is that there's not a high turnover rate with teachers. There are high turnover rates in other areas of the workforce, maybe because of pay and so forth. But what we would like to do is become an employer where turnover is not an issue and we are promoting people from within and giving people opportunities. A lot of times people are not looking for promotions. Some people are looking for lattices, which are expansion of their duties. Some people, you know, they don't want to be supervisors. They don't want to be responsible for other staff, but they still want to feel rewarded at work. So upon entering the district, I noticed that we had not yet established a vision or mission for the talent, well, for the HR department or for the talent office. So I was asked to present at the retreat for school leaders in August, and I didn't want to go in without a framework for us for the year. So we came up with what we wanted to be at the beginning of the 16-17 school year to just have marching orders for our work. So this is what we came up with. So we are the Office of Talent Management and Human Resources, and we want to be a place where people will visit to inquire about employment and career opportunities, a place that serves as a resource center to our staff members for employment-related matters, and a place which provides support and assistance to school leaders and staff so that the district's mission and goals can be successfully implemented and achieved. With that said, we do need a vision and mission, and we plan on developing that in the summer of 2017, hopefully with an outside person so we can kind of generate some ideas. And our mission and vision will be tied to the strategic operating plan, the language that I just shared, and also our challenges and or successes from this year. So we'll look at everything in combination, and as a group, we will determine what our vision or mission is going forward. And my hope is that once it's developed, on the day of convocation, we can share that with the staff. So that would be exciting for us. The next couple slides are some summary of the progress reports. So I'll just go through the slide, but then I want to direct your attention to the progress report that looks like this. It really looks almost like a report card. So we set goals, and again, I looked at the goals that I set with the superintendent and also our SOP goal, and we set goals for the department because we thought, you know, there's so much work, we want to be able to report out on what we're doing, and we want to feel like we're doing things, and we want people to see what we're doing. So we decided to create quarterly goals, and our first quarter, our goals centered around HR services and support, which is the daily interactions of HR. So people calling the office and asking for things, employee relations, policies, that type of activity. Another goal was centered around career and professional growth opportunities for the staff. Again, that aligns to our strategic operating plan goal. And then there's this state reporting that we're required to do every year. We wanted to make sure we were in compliance. So to the right, you would see 5 bullet points, and this is where I condensed what we did. So we created communication opportunities to district employees. We created a year-long induction process. We provided efficient staffing options to support the budget and the buildings. We created opportunities for staff members to grow professionally, and we met our state deadlines for mandated reporting. But if you look on, I think you might have a double-sided version. So if you can look at the talent office priorities from July to September of 2016. So these are the details of this spreadsheet. So if you look down under the HR services and support, you'll see some of the things that we've done. And the reason I would like you to take a look at this is because this is the work. This is the work that we're doing in our department. So under the create systems to effectively communicate to district's employees, you'll see that we updated something called a personnel action form, and we created a distribution process. And what that is For every employee, if anything ever happens with an employee, whether they're hired, they're terminated, they're transferred, they have a name change, that's called an action. The district didn't have a full process for documenting action. Sometimes we did letters, sometimes things weren't documented. The personnel action form was actually created before I got here, but what we did was we enhanced the form by adding distribution lists for the unions, the building leaders, technology, because people were not notified when there were changes. And we're working on rolling that out so whenever there's a change across the district, people will know, and so people aren't just popping up anywhere. So that was one thing that we created. We also created a system to notify administrators and teachers of certification expiration. When I walked in, there were a couple people whose certificates had been expired and we didn't really communicate with them. We didn't communicate with the buildings, and then we were trying to get them certified before the beginning of the school year. So we've created a process where they're notified 90 days in advance, and we allow them time to interact with us so we can support them in the process, and we notify the principals as well. So that has been completed. And you'll see in the sections, it says completed on the right side of the page. Create a year-long induction process for the teachers. So last year, I believe Dr. Adamowski encouraged the district to have monthly meetings with new hires. So that has happened, and we've expanded on that this year. So this year, what we've done with the meetings for new hires is we tried to make them more intentional around new hire issues. We planned the agenda ahead of time, and we've also implemented new hire surveys. And the reason we've implemented these surveys is we're asking new hires to tell us about their experience. When you first saw the ad, how was our website? How was your interview? How was your onboarding? How was your first day on the job? Did you have everything you needed? And so we disseminated two surveys, the new hire survey and then the recruitment survey. And then 90 days into the year, we disseminated another survey, which was called the 90-day survey. And from that survey data, we received a lot of feedback where people slammed our processes, or they actually were very happy about something that they thought we did well, and they also gave suggestions on things that we should do going forward. So we implemented that process. We have collected data on that process, and the next step would be to plan initiatives from that process. And as I go through, if there's an initiative that came up from the new hire or the surveys, I'll let you know what that was. So next we have provide efficient staffing options to support the budget in the buildings. One of the things that we've done so far is we've explored the outsourcing of special ed paras whenever we need substitute paras. We have substitute teachers and sub-paras, and it's a lot for us to manage. Sometimes it is costly for the district. Sometimes if you have categories of substitute teachers, people get hurt, you have unemployment costs, you have workers' comp costs. There are many reasons why you want to outsource various parts of the program. So we were able to outsource the substitute paras for special ed to a vendor. So we did the RFP, we did a sole source provider, meaning that they were the only vendor who could restrain or employee or students if they needed help, or if their special ed student needed support. It was the only vendor who would actually help us in that area. We also expanded the use of student interns as sub-teachers and placed student interns in each building. I believe there are 3 buildings which are not staffed with student interns. The reason we did this was we're looking at the benefits of using a student intern as a substitute teacher as opposed to general subs. There are many benefits to having an intern because an intern is in the building every day. And so the students are familiar with the intern. There's also a cost reduction if we use the intern. So right now we're in a place where we're using a hybrid version, which would be a combination of student interns and substitute teachers. And we're hoping that we can find the best place for us to move forward, whether it will be with all interns or substitutes, or if we will keep a hybrid. So we've done that, and so what we've done is increase the amount of interns that we've had in the buildings. career opportunities and professional growth opportunities for staff. We have expanded TEAM, which is a system that is used in the state for new teachers who have less than 5 years of experience. We created a position for a team district facilitator, which is a teacher in our district who can oversee that process. And in collaboration with the union, we set a stipend, so that was a career opportunity for a teacher to do something that was kind of administrative. And then we've also created team grade level stipends. And again, this particular program is developed so that new teachers can have support. And we manage this process through HR. And whether it was done effectively or not, I wouldn't comment on it. I think it's more effective if there are more levels and teachers have more support. And if we allow teachers to actually provide that support, veteran teachers to provide support to new teachers, and we can enhance their pay, I think it's a great move for the district. So that's what we've done. We've also created a stipend for a bilingual speech-language pathologist to afford ways for teachers to do more in the district and have a little extra cash. And we created a non-certified staff survey to identify staff members who are interested in becoming educators, and we prepared for the dissemination of that survey in the second quarter, as you'll see. And then the last section is all of our state reporting, which I won't go into. We just met all of the deadlines on that. So that was quarter one, pretty heavy, but we did it. We completed most of our goals. In quarter two, we had 3 areas: recruitment and retention, HR services and support, and HR technology and integration. And there are just 3 bullet points up there of what I condensed. But again, I'm going to direct you to the progress report. Under recruitment and retention in quarter two, October to December, we created opportunities for non-certified staff to take steps to become educators, obtain degrees, or obtain college credits. And we did that by, 1, assessing the non-certified staff members, their status related to college credits and their interest in going into the field of education. So we disseminated that survey that we prepped for in the first quarter. We also started building partnerships with the Relay program. We already had a partnership that Dr. Connor has been working on with Relay, and we built on the non-certified Relay section of that, so I'll talk more about that later on in the presentation. We started working with Norwalk Community College to see if they might be able to give us some tuition support or write grants with us to get tuition support if people wanted to take classes there. And we started working with UConn, and we started to explore Teach for America. We also planned on hosting a certification fair to build interest and guide individuals to next steps. We have not been able to host the fair, but what we've done is we've hosted 2 relay fairs with the Relay program, and we had, I think, 10 people attend those fairs, so I'll talk more about that. Under human resources and support, we wanted to streamline HR services to provide excellent customer service to the district in the following areas: develop and revise and adopt new policy and processes for volunteers in the district. There's a lot of work to be done there, and it's a great initiative for our district. We want to automate the system so that everything is not done manually, and we can have background checks done ahead of time and be in compliance at all times with the law. We also streamlined the substitute process, again integrating it with the intern program. Hosting the substitute fair. We had a substitute fair in last quarter, I believe. It was not as a big turnout as it was last year, but we did have a number of people who were interested in working in the district as a substitute teacher. We also streamlined HR Munis for our personnel actions, including exit procedures. And Munis is the system that we house our HR data in, so we're just looking for ways to make sure that we have systems in place with Munis. When people leave the district, when people are hired, we're using Munis to help us take the paperwork out of the process. We also developed a process for leave of absence tracking, so we can get a handle on our FMLA, workers' comp, and manage people, as sometimes people are out and we don't know that they're out for a long time, so we've kind of streamlined that so we know where people are. If we have to engage them in maybe moving on from the district, we're working on that as well, because it is also important. Sometimes people don't want to be here, and if you don't talk about it, they might never resign. And then there are people who actually want to come back to work, so we work with bringing them back into the district so they can continue to be great employees. We've expanded the year-long onboarding process by hosting a new hires social in December. It was actually fun. A lot of people came out on new hires. We had 51 teachers this year. I think about 36 came out to the new hires social. We fed them. They, excuse me. They also did the 90-day survey at that time and gave us data for, I'm sorry, excuse me. Hope I'm not on TV. Gave us data for, or benchmarking for the data that we need to put the initiatives in place for a 90-day experience. We are also working with the city to create a risk management strategy for workers' comp to decrease the claims and also to make the workplace safer. That's actually something we'll be doing the 2018 school year in collaboration with Tom Hamilton and the finance department. We started looking at the job descriptions for the NFEP union so that we can align that to performance management. We also started looking at examining the HR technology. We automated our posting process in AppleTrack, so now when people are requesting job postings, everything goes through the system. All of the approvals are in the system. Tom Hamilton can approve it, I can approve it. It's actually tied to our budget numbers now. So this is a part of position control that will be rolled out from the finance department. So we've been supporting that. One of the concerns I believe board members had at one point earlier in the year was the recruitment process as it was related to notifying candidates who had applied to the district. So we've now enhance the recruitment process by adding auto replies to our system. So when someone applies, they get an auto reply that says, thank you for your application, and it kind of says what the next steps are, you'll hear from us, and so forth. At this time, we're trying to add it at a second level, so if we interview people, we can also engage them through the system as well. We are also exploring software with the tech department, Mr. Valenzizi, to automate our HR files. We have a number of files in a room that's just, it's like the room is getting smaller and smaller, and so we would like to move our files to an electronic system, which is what most people do at this, in this time. We also we have also started to expand the use of the My Learning Plan platform, and that's the platform that houses the teacher evaluation tool and all of the teacher eval data for 900 teachers. So we have realized that that system can also house the data for non-certified staff. And if we're looking to develop our non-certified staff, they should also be in the system, and their evaluation should be in the system. We are also exploring PD options to offer through My Learning Plan, because we've also identified that My Learning Plan is a professional development system, and it can house professional development. People can go in and take classes that we might offer. We can track things that people need to complete, such as DCF training, sexual harassment training. Things that are tracked manually can now be tracked in the system. So we started exploring that, and we're hoping to roll that out in the third quarter. So that is the progress report as it is right now. I'll just direct you back to the PowerPoint. So that was Q1 and Q2. A lot of things, very excited about what we did. And in Q3, you do not have a progress report because obviously Q3 ends in March. But to set our Q3 goals, we actually engaged in a book group in my department So that, because we want to also be a model for the district for professional development. We want to make sure that we're also growing in our work and in our careers. So we studied a chapter from a book called Teaching Talent, and from chapter 3, it was called The Principal as a Human Capital Manager. We set our goals based on the data in that book. So that what we did was we looked at how to support the building so that they can be more efficient in the management of talent, because we need them to help us develop our staff. And what are the tools that we can provide to the principals so that we can support them as they develop the staff. And so very quickly, the 6 bullet points that we came up with after reading the book, the chapter, was 1, provide efficient services to the schools by streamlining the volunteer process and piloting the Munis employee self-service module. And this is just to ease the amount of things that are happening in schools. So, you know, we want to make sure that they can see their volunteers online, they can see who's applying for their volunteer opportunities. Right now, they don't know who's doing what. Everything is manual. So that this will support them in their work. Munis employee self-service is basically a system where employees can go in and they can manage their own data. They can change their beneficiary information, their emergency information, their tax forms. They can see their W-2 forms. They can change their direct deposits. And there are a number of things that you can do with employee self-service, but those are the things that we'll be rolling out, hopefully by the spring. We also will be creating a recruitment and marketing plan for the district that includes the new district logo for branding. And we would like to work with all of the schools so that every school knows what the plan is, so that when they're interviewing, we can share with candidates so they're more enticed to come to our schools. We also are hoping to standardize orientation at the district and the building levels. One of the key things that came out of the chapter was that new hire orientation is the most important step for a new hire. And if we can give them a manual that has everything that they need to start, they would be better off in their jobs in the first 90 days. And so when we thought about it, we needed to collaborate with the building. So we can sit in HR and we can say, well, this is what we think should be in an in a new hire manual. But the buildings are specific to their buildings. They might have different rules on what they do with their keys, if you lock the doors when you leave the classrooms. So we have 2 teams working on the manual. We have a district level team, and then we have a few members of the team who are assigned to the buildings to work with them to gather the information that we would need for the district, for the building part of the manual. In the manual, we'll have things like org charts, right? That's a big thing. I think people need to know who they can go to, who they should call when they come into the district. We hope to engage non-certified staff in career growth activities. Again, use My Learning Plan to streamline the evaluation process. And from chapter 3 of that book, they also talked about the talent office distributing talent research to building leaders on an ongoing basis. So now we subscribe to something called the Marshal Memo, which is something that's geared towards educators. Principals can use it, and it will help them in their management of staff. And whatever we can find on a monthly basis, we will send out to the principals that's research-based. Lastly, our quarterly goals for quarter 4, I would anticipate that it would come out from whatever my recommendations are to you tonight, and ensuring that our first, second, and third quarter goals are closed out. So again, that will be to be determined. And just quickly, these are our accomplishments to date. I won't go into detail, but I just wanted to point out the focus area. I mentioned buckets. So these are the buckets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the buckets are marketing, recruiting, and selection, new hire induction, evaluations, health and welfare, engagement, retention, and succession planning, and HR services, labor relations, and risk management. So on the right side, and I'll let you take a look at that on your own time, it just kind of goes through all of the things we just discussed. but it ties it to each area or each dimension of the HR, of the talent office. These are our future goals, and I will go through this because I think this is important. So the focus area in marketing, recruitment, and selection, we are developing a partnership with TFA to continue to identify staff, and we're continuing to identify staff interested in educator careers. We are working on the new hire induction and PD training. What we would like to do with the surveys that we have completed so far is we want to post them online so that people can see the results of the survey. Because in order for people to continue to participate, they would want to see the results. So that is a goal for us going forward. Again, the use of My Learning Plan to support the district. We would like to roll out wellness initiatives across the district. We would like to provide scholarships for non-certified staff. We would like to dedicate staff members to recruitment engagement and dedicate a staff member to support evaluation, PD, and training. And we want to continue to build relationships with our unions and partner with the city to decrease workers' comp and risk management. So the focus areas that you just saw, those areas are the dimensions of the talent office. And so that was what I wanted to present to you tonight, but I wanted you to take a look at the work before you saw the model, so that now that I show you the model, you'll understand where the work falls. So these are the dimensions of the talent office that we would use for the Norwalk Public Schools. In the talent office, as Dr. Adamowski said, prior to this model, we were an HR model, very transactional, processed, based on policies and procedures, black and white, no gray area, right? So what you can see is that we're trying to become a service center for the district. I call these the bubbles, and these are the things that we just talked about in all of the focus areas, so I won't go into detail, but we have a bubble for new hire and induction and professional development. We have one for teacher evaluation and other evaluation. We have one for health and wellness. We have one for engagement, retention, and succession planning, and this is all a part of recruitment. Of course, HR services, that's the daily function. Again, we would like to make sure that we are available whenever a principal or a supervisor calls for any support during the day. We need to have people dedicated to that. And then labor relations and risk management. This is our current structure. It's a very flat structure. This is the structure that we have been working under for the last 6 months and even before. And we did accomplish a lot within this structure, but again, it's very flat. My recommendations, in order for us to focus on the dimensions of the talent model, these dimensions, we would need to move out of this flat structure. I would group these dimensions in these 4 areas. Marketing, recruitment, engagement, retention, and succession planning is one area. New hire induction, onboarding, PD, and staff evaluation and development is another area. HR services would be another area, and then benefits, labor, and risk management. So my recommendations would be that we look at the organizational structure within the talent office. We enhance the current position that is the Director of Labor Relations to a Deputy Chief or an Assistant Talent and Labor Relations position, which will also be the successor position to the Chief Talent Officer, which is one of Dr. Adamowski's goals for each of his senior management team members. We would also ask that you consider creating a talent acquisition and engagement manager. This is actually in the budget for this year, a proposed budget. And then we would want to do the same for PD and career management by creating a professional and career manager. And this is not budgeted this year, but hopefully in the following, which would be the 18-19 school year. This is what the proposed structure would look like. So it's not as flat. You would see that the Director of Labor Relations will oversee the HR services and benefits and risk management, and then the rest of the team would be engaging staff, developing staff, working on systems, developing systems for the district. So we would need to repurpose one position, which I believe we did this year. We would need to hire an HR technician, which is a position that actually exists, but it has not been filled, so it's not really new. But the new position would be the position of the professional and career management person. The last 3 slides you can take a look at on your own. These are just the duties for each of those positions that I discussed, the repurposing and the reorganization of those positions, so those are the duties. And lastly, before I close, to illustrate the work of the Talent Office, I want to take you back to page 4. The Strategic Operating Plan. Develop exemplary teachers and school leaders, fill the majority of school and district leadership positions through planning and development of staff from within. In November, we disseminated a survey to our non-certified staff members. I believe we disseminated to over 200 people. I believe 148 people responded. Of those 148, we found that 59 of the staff members who participated held a master's or a bachelor's degree. This is our non-certified staff. Of that 59, 36 were interested in becoming educators and attending the certification fair. 13 are interested in becoming, are not interested in becoming an educator, but they were undecided about the certification fair, so that means we might be able to convince them. And then 10 are not interested in becoming educators. So again, we had a goal to host the fair last quarter. We did not, but we will host it this quarter. But what we've done so far in January and February, actually, January we hosted a relay fair. We had 7 of those people with masters and bachelors come out. Of that group, 5 of them were persons of color or minority teachers, minority candidates. And then yesterday we hosted another fair. We had 3 people come out, and 3 of those, 3 out of the 3 were minority candidates. So we were actually able to hit 2 of our goals, which is 1, to start planning and developing staff from within, but 2, increase the pipeline for eligible minority teacher candidates to become certified teachers. And so we were able to do that because we had someone who's focused on this strategy, even though the person who's in the position is actually split right now between an HR specialist and a recruiter. And if that position is a full-time recruitment position, these are some of the great things that we would be able to do for the district. So that's the presentation. I'll open it up for questions.
Any questions or comments? Shirley and then Brian.
Hi, Therese. I'm glad you touched on the minority teachers, because I was going to ask that question because I didn't hear or see, and I'm glad at the end you decided to bring it in. I was, you and Dr. Connor, we all went to the education symposium, and that's one of the biggest initiatives that's within the state is minority recruitment. But it's aligned too with HBC's, Historical Black College and University, and I'm just trying to find out how is that aligned with us with recruiting, going out, trying to get minorities in here, and especially trying to get them from the HBCUs. That I know that the state is pushing on that as well. So
right. So first, I'll start off by saying that the hiring of teachers of color, I don't really like the word minority teacher recruitment, but that's what the state uses. But I would love for the district to go to a different term. But teachers of color or minority teachers, you have to implement a number of strategies. So one strategy would be HBCUs. One strategy would be Teach for America because of the representation of people coming out of that group. One strategy would be Relay. One strategy would be where we post our ads. But Mary Jordan actually mentioned this before. It's not just about finding the teachers, it's about retaining them. So one strategy has to be our climate, how we're developing, what type of support we're putting into place, how affinity groups is something I think I mentioned somewhere on here, even though I didn't talk about it. How do we support people when we find them? Because if we go out and we find teachers and they come in, will they stay with us if they're not supported? So HBCUs is one of the things that we would like. Again, if we have someone who's dedicated to recruitment, we can send someone out to the colleges. Unless we do that, we won't be able to focus on it. But I hope that the board will, will support that so that we can look at different options to diversify the staff.
And I know one of the issues with that was the certification, which I'm proud of that, because they're saying students that are in these states, sometimes their certification, they cannot get the certification here, and that keeps a lot of them away. But I believe that you guys are working on trying to address that issue.
Yeah, there are two different certification issues. One is reciprocity, so the state doesn't necessarily have reciprocity, but again, our recruiter has been working with the state to figure out ways to get people an initial year certification before they have to meet all of the requirements. The second thing with certification was that a lot of the candidates for educator programs who were persons of color were not passing the praxis tests and so forth to become certified. The state has since done some adjustments, and so now we're hopeful that we can develop people and we can support them with praxis. So those were the two certification issues. Yes, you're welcome.
Okay. Brian?
Yeah, so, well, first of all, excellent work. In a short amount of time, you've done a lot of work here, and I know when I onboarded for you, this area was in shambles, so you're definitely making strides here.
Thank you.
Just a couple of quick questions. Teach for America, that partnership, is that a goal to get done this year and potentially have placements in the fall?
Our goal is to continue to work with them to see if we can have placements in the fall. Obviously, they have their requirements. We would have to hit timelines and so forth. But our goal is to move forward with the partnership with them. And so we have not done anything beyond this meeting so we will know more maybe next week once we've reached out to them.
Okay, thanks. Then maybe this is rhetorical. You said you're going to develop a vision and a mission, and something about getting like a third party to help with that. Are you also going to have a slice of the organization help out with that? Some kind of committee or?
Well, we haven't really talked about what it might look like. That could be an option. We just talked about not doing it by ourselves in a silo. It shouldn't just be limited to the HR department. We would like other people to kind of talk to us about what they think our vision and our mission should be. So we thought that by getting someone from the outside, they can help us generate ideas, but it's also a good idea to include people from the district.
Okay. Thanks.
Artie?
Quick question. I'm on Teach for America's website, and I'm trying to find out if there's a cost involved to the partnership.
Yes, it's about, is it 3,000 or 4,000 per?
3,300.
3,300, which is our cost, and then per teacher.
$3,300 per teacher.
Per teacher, and then the total cost is actually double that. It's 6,600. The other half is raised through philanthropy. That pays for the national recruitment of these folks, as well as their support and coaching particularly during the first year, when they're working on their alternative route, and then some during the second year. We're also sensitive to this issue of sticking around, because it is a 2-year commitment. However, on the other hand, the other factor that balances that is that we need new blood. And we need people that have been trained in other universities other than our state universities. And, you know, we're encouraged by the fact that I think it's something like 60% of the TFAs now are staying through the third year, and over half stay beyond that in terms of a career. Many have also become principals and so on. So the nature of TFA is changing. It used to be this 2-year commitment, and then you went out and you made money. You know, you came from the best universities in the country. You did 2 years. This was your social service commitment, and then you went out and made money. Now it's becoming very different, and they are encouraging their members to stay and to make a difference in education. And Wendy Kopp, who was the founder, she wrote this book called, you know, Changing the World. That was her vision. The TFA was going to change the world, and now their focus is on changing the world of education and being able to stay a little longer and multiple years. So again, I think I hope you saw from or gleaned from Teresa's presentation is there is no silver bullet here, right? You do well when you do multiple things, a variety of things, and you do them well because they all contribute a little bit to what our goals are.
Any other questions, comments? I would add my compliments. Outstanding work, and I know you're building good relationships with the leadership of our unions as well, and it's a real pleasant change to go from I think chaos would be a nice word to describe what HR was before you got here to really getting straightened out in terms of day-to-day stuff, but having some great goals to work on too. So keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I just wanted to mention, Mike, just to follow up, you know, I'm our board representative at CES, our local RESC, and this whole issue of minority teacher recruitment comes up almost every month. And you know, the state is trying to do a number of things. There's a woman in Hartford right now at the State Board of Education kind of looking into how the certification process is defined, if there are any openings to allow people certified in other states. But I think from everything I've learned through CES, I think the Teresa's strategy, where it's kind of multi-pronged, you're going at it in different ways, is the way to do it. And in the old days, you know, there was this reliance on hiring teachers in the South, bringing them up here. They were not home, they weren't used to the climate here, they were fish out of water, whatever, and none of them stayed. And so this kind of one-size-fits-all solution, there isn't one, I think as Dr. Adamowski was just saying, and you've got a like almost rifle shot, right, and you're gonna, you know, have range of successes, but you're gonna be able to build on that. And the fact is, I think our teacher body right now is roughly 16% minority. Yes. I think the state is only at 7%, so yep, we have a ways to go, but we're doing a lot better than the state, whatever that's worth.
Right. Yes.
I just wanted to, in conclusion, highlight 2 points for the board. One is we would like to accomplish the secession position for the 17-18 school year. And that means that we would take the current labor, we have a labor relations position, and anticipating a retirement there, we would upgrade that, and we have that in the 17-18 recommended budget. The other position, as Cherise said, that rounds this all out, we think we would have to wait until the following year, given our financial situation. The second thing I just wanted to highlight, and I'm surprised there has not been more discussion over it, was the fact that we have implemented Munis position control between the finance department and the HR department. You remember the lack of it was the bane of our existence a year ago. And
well, it's not completely implemented, but
it's almost there.
It's almost there.
And a tremendous amount of work on the part of Teresa's office and Tom Hamilton's group, but we can actually know how many employees we have now and where they are and how they're paid, and it has given wonderful order and light to all the people we employ.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you
Night.
very much. All right, so that leaves one item on the agenda, which is discussion of proposals for mediation and impact bargaining. This is an executive session item, so the chair would entertain a motion to go into executive session for that purpose. Artie moves. Is there a second? Sorrell moves. Seconds. All in favor? We'll take our usual 5-minute recess, and then we will reconvene and talk about mediation and impact bargaining.